Hey everyone, welcome to the Dare to Care podcast, the podcast where we talk about the inner workings of ministry at Inspire Family Fellowship and community stories within and around the church. If you have any comments, stories, or questions about Inspire or our Dare to Care ministries at any point during our podcast today, feel free to send those questions to amy@inspirefamily.org. We also invite you to join us in person any Sunday or Wednesday that you're able, 523 North 21st Street, Bismarck, North Dakota. We have Sunday services at 9:15 and 10:45, and Wednesdays we do things a little differently with a meal at 5, classes for all ages at 6, and a service for everybody at 7. My name is Ty Farnsworth. I'm the worship coordinator here at Inspire Family Fellowship, joined today, like I said, by Amy Langang, our Women's and Dare to Care coordinator, and our special guest today, Mr. Erik Benson. Erik, how are you doing?
Morning. Good.
Good.
We are so excited to have you here today, Erik. You started coming to Inspire about a year and a half, 2 years ago now?
About a year and a half ago, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Was first turned on to it by a classmate of Lila's, the Piper family, the Pesky family.
Yep.
The Pesky family. And first I was just sending her to the Wednesday night sessions, and I knew there was something still missing in my life too. So then I started coming to the Bible studies also on Wednesday nights.
That's awesome. Cool. And you know what, Erik, I'm going to kind of just jump into this with you, if that's all right, because we brought you here because you've got a story to tell. You've got quite the faith journey, and it was a rough road to get you sitting here in this chair and living the amazing life that you are currently living. So I guess I just want you to dive in, I guess, and tell us.
Where does faith start for you, and how does your faith journey develop?
Well, I grew up with a Lutheran background. Faith was always present in my life as a child growing up. You know, went through the whole process of confirmation, First Communion, and all that through a Lutheran church locally here in town. It was also at that time, you know, around age 12 to 14, where I started acting out. I was a naughty kid. I was a miserable brat, you know, and mom and dad at that time were looking for any kind of avenue for assistance or help, you know, to have answers of what to do next, you know. At that time, the church really didn't help them, you know. They felt like they were abandoned by the church, and, you know, don't get me wrong, I was a heck of a handful, you know. So at that point, you know, faith kind of was eliminated from our family household, our household dynamic. Then you look at the years that are in between. I guess we can jump right into it. You know, that's at the same time where my addiction issues began. You know, the best way to explain it is a person said to me, "When was the first time that you no longer wanted to feel?" Right? And he said to me that was when my addiction began. Right? That was around 12, 13. It was just that I found that drugs were the way to turn that feeling off, those emotions that were there for a reason. And we fast forward 28 years of addiction, and I get to a point where I'm at rock bottom. And this is not the first time of being at rock bottom. We had multiple treatments. We had multiple rock bottoms where we just skipped on the bottom and then got back up and kept going back with what we were. Throughout the whole thing, though, you know, there was always that underlining feeling of shame, of hurt, of knowing that this wasn't the life I wanted, you know. Mm-hmm. I was brought up in a supportive household, you know, so everybody's looking at this, me going, what's wrong? He had a good home, you know, and it was a lot of the things that were going on within inside me, you know. The key point, though, was, 4.5 years ago, I finally get to rock bottom. I'm here in Burleigh County on a crotch rocket motorcycle. If any of you are familiar with those, they're a very fast motorcycle. South of town, and I pull up to a stop sign, look behind me, and I see those lights flash. And I had two choices. It was either go that way or go that way, all right? And I was like, well, either way, I'm going to lose this guy, you know? And that's the mindset of where I was at. Mm-hmm. I ended up taking off on that motorcycle, and I think at one point I was like at 165, close to 170. And I heard a voice that said, stop. And I just pulled the motorcycle over, got off the motorcycle, and stood there waiting for the sheriff to catch up with me, you know. No explanation of where that voice came from. No explanation of what made me do it, right? Mm-hmm. I had every intentions of not coming out of a corner that was up ahead, you know, but something intervened. And that's, for me, that was the first sign. We fast forward 45 days later. I was sitting in jail, told some of the staff there that I needed to go right to treatment. I can't get out. Same thing was agreed with the whole family, you know, because we'd been searching for a place for me to go for inpatient treatment. And they let me out and they tell me I have to make it till the next day. Okay. This is how strong the holds of addiction were. Even after 45 days of being clean in jail, I had 24 hours to make it, and I couldn't even make it 24 hours. That same night after being released, I went back out and used. Next day, luckily, we went to a treatment center up in Watford City. It was 3 days later that a gentleman from one of the local churches up there came, and he sat down with me and he says, I see you. I see the pain you have. I see. And he started saying all this stuff to me, and I was just like, oh, where'd they get this gypsy at that's reading my, and I'm just like, he was telling me all the things that were going on, and he told me to go pray on it. He says, go pray on it tonight before bed. He says, you ask God to remove this from you. And the next morning I woke up with not a craving, not a want, not a desire, and the inspiration to start moving in a direction of a new life, and that's where we began the journey of recovery.
So, go ahead.
I was going to say, so how many years has it been for you now?
Now I'm November of this year will be 5 years, so we're just over 4.5 years.
Okay.
Yep. And in that 4.5 years, it has been quite the journey. I'm 45, so I knew that when I came back, I had my daughter, right? I'm blessed with the fact that she was young enough not to understand when Dad was in active addiction. Prior to me getting clean, me and her mother shared custody, joint custody. And when I came back, right away she wanted to come back and have daddy days. I had to be very honest with her at 5 years old and say, Dad's not ready yet, kiddo. Mm-hmm. There's some things that Dad has to do, But it was about 4 or 5 months later that we ended up going into the court system, and I started my pursuing full custody of her. And she started coming to live with us. And then for the next 3 years, she was living with me full time, 7 days a week. And that was a wonderful thing because she got to see Dad go from jail to treatment to believing that, guess what, there's a higher power. And I do all my NA meetings online. So it's a rural group out of Montana. So she can come sit down on my lap and listen to what's being said and say hi to all these people. And they can involve her in the meeting too, And that was where I thought, I don't want another job. I want a career. I want a future, Let's go back to school. Sure. That's a good idea. All of a sudden, there we are. We're at BSC. We're going to school for the first 2-year degree. She's got to come watch me walk across the stage for graduation, right?
That's so
and she's
special.
up there in the crowd, and she's just screaming and happy. Get done with that. Realize that all the job careers that for that degree were out of the state. They were state a couple or two way. That's not me. I'm not leaving North Dakota. So I thought, oh man, first of all, that negativity started to creep back in. What did you do all this for? It amounted for nothing, And I really had to dig deep inside of me to have that pride or that happiness of the success I made. And instead of falling back into that negative attitude, I had to say, you know what, we're going to keep going. So we tacked on another 2-year degree. And she's like, Dad, why are you going back to school? Well, 10-year-old, right? Well, because your dad wants to be able to have a job here and a career, but she got to witness all this happening. So this little girl's got high expectations of what life looks like now, And a lot of people pointed out to me that, look at this, you're showing her the path by walking it. And luckily she's old enough to see it,
So you talked a lot about your family and how they were supportive of you.
Yeah.
Can you touch on that just a little bit? Because I can't imagine that being easy for either you or them.
Yeah.
Growing up.
There were many, many years. Full disclosure, when you're in active addiction, you are a very self-centered, very harmful, very hurtful, very miserable person. I was. There was not a single kind thing about me while I was in active addiction. And my parents went through multiple attempts to help me, starting all the way back from, me going to the Prairie Learning Center at the time, where now they have a recovery center down there. They sent me down there thinking, okay, this might be the answer, And the way that it worked for me is every time I'd get on probation or any kind of supervision, I'd hang on by the white knuckles, right, and just skate through. Mom and Dad, they saw this, because at home, they put up with the wrath of it, me coming and going wherever, all the lying, all the stealing, the mistrust, all of that. It did put a very big strain on their marriage, and that's one thing that I really hold dear, because I look back at it, and I say, wow, how did the two of you stay together putting up with me, right?
Yep.
And there's no explanation besides love. Love was what kept them together. There were many years where one parent would wipe their hands of me, and the other parent would say, oh, they always had Mom wanting to take and cuddle me, and Dad, he was like, oh, that's enough. And it was 6 years ago that they finally got to that point. Because during that time of my active usage, after Lila was born, I would stay clean on the 4 days that I had her and only smoke weed. That was what I justified to myself, and they were watching this. So they were like, well, you guys are going to stay here because we're going to take care of our granddaughter because you cannot, And it finally got to the point where they said enough is enough. As parents now, as myself as a parent, I can't ever imagine being pushed to that extreme of a point in life to where for your own sanity, for your own health, you've got to put up that barrier. You've got to put up that boundary and say, you're not welcome here anymore until you get help. But there was never a time throughout all the years of my addiction that they didn't lose that hope. They knew that it was just the addiction. They knew that kid that they knew was still in there. Somewhere deep down inside, our son is still in there,
I'm broadly familiar with most addiction programs, and you talked a little bit about the higher power concept. How, when you were going through treatment, did you deal, or maybe you continued to deal with, coming across the things that trigger you to want to use again, and putting the higher power above those triggers when you encounter them?
Oh, so when it pertains to like triggers and stuff, I'm one of the few, I guess, I don't know, we're all different, but I have not had, in the last 4.5 years, I've not had a desire to go use. I've not had a desire to, as I call it, turn that switch of emotion back off. Sure. But where that comes into a play is there's 40 years of my life that I never learned a single thing because I was so clouded, right? Everything was so clouded. So I'm starting from ground zero, learning all the different things that normally a kid would learn. Emotional processing, all these different feelings, right? So there can be a simple thing where, let's say it's something that displeases me, right? Or I'm upset about. I have to go through a process of saying, wait a minute, do I want to respond to that? How am I going to respond to that? And is there going to be anything positive that comes from it, right? And then if I can't make peace with that by not saying something, that's where at the end of the night, I have to pass that on to higher power. And that's a very active, involved process for me, right? At the end of the night, God, can you please take away these challenges I face today? I do a self-evaluation for the day, and those things get passed on, right? And then next morning, I get to start the next day, not carrying that baggage, right? Because if I were to carry that baggage from one day to the next, it's just going to snowball and make me miserable, right? And then you're going to start seeing some of those old character defects that I'm still working on, because that's where I'm learning the most. I'm learning to live, right? I'm not learning to not use drugs. I'm learning to live in a healthy way.
So looking back at just the last 30-ish years, right? I'm assuming you've reflected a lot on your past. And yeah. I'm just wondering if you've seen, besides the moment when you were on that motorcycle, and we'll just say it how it is, you heard God tell you to stop.
Yeah.
And looking back and reflecting, have you had any other moments throughout your, addiction and recovery where you've really felt His presence guide you? Yeah,
and that's a funny one, because part of a 12-step NA program is, building that spiritual connection, right? It's different for each person, but for me, my spiritual connection is with God. So you jump into the third day of treatment after speaking to the local man from the church that came by. I wake up the next morning going, wait a minute, what kind of voodoo did you put in my soup last night? Because this morning is totally different than the morning before. And then I had to wait till like the Thursday of that week to go talk to this gentleman, Jules. And he says, yeah, Eric, he goes, did you pray on it? Did you mean it? God heard you. I was like, all right, we're only 7 days sober, so already my brain's sitting there going, oh, well then, now throughout the last 4 years, there are different things that in life I have put 2 and 2 together, right? And this is something else where I'm teaching my daughter at the same time, So I said, hey, kiddo, when somebody gives you a compliment and you feel a wonderful feeling inside of you, I said, that's the Spirit. That's the Spirit of God in you. He's letting you enjoy that feeling, right? Mm-hmm. Wow, Dad, And I said, yeah. And then she looks at me and she says, well, Dad, then, how does that apply to you? I says, that applies to Dad all the time. It's just I have to listen. I have to listen for that guidance. I have to listen to where I'm going to make the next decision, and there's never a single decision anymore that I make without consulting other people or asking for guidance on it. And that's where, sometimes being patient and having to wait for an answer, that is difficult. I think that's the human nature. My biggest one right now that I'm struggling with is my will over his will, right? This is what I want, but I have to be okay with waiting for it to play out. Where for most of my life, it was always my way or the highway, and I don't care who I hurt or destroy in the path. It was like this, that self-centered spotlight, But that's where the big one, and for teaching her, she has so many questions that at the same time, I don't have answers for, because it's been so long since I was active in faith, right? So I've been using The Chosen, showing her clips of The Chosen, and she's been coming on Wednesdays, and we'll get in the car and she'll be in the back seat and we'll be driving home. Dad, did you know some guy with a slingshot took down a giant? Really, kiddo? In the back seat. Really, I think I've heard that one before. Can you tell me some more about it, right? And do you know his name? And it's that open conversation of her learning, and then at the same time showing her clips, with the fishermen of men. And the net that's being cast by Jesus, and she's telling him to cast that net. She's like, "Huh, Dad?" She goes, "So is that like how you work with your NA and you try to reach people? Wow, you're 10 years old and you have this kind of yeah, kind of like that, Lila, kind of like that, but this is different, Yeah. But it's those connections where if I don't guide her or guide her to the best of my ability to making an understanding that these things that you see happen, that they don't just happen. That's that's the Spirit moving throughout all of us, and it's challenging, sure. Because being a 10-year-old kid in elementary school, it's not okay to say the things that we would like to say out loud, right? And noticing things where other kids are being, and she's a 10-year-old girl, they are ruthless at this age. I'm not even lying to you. Why would they say something so unkind, Dad? Why would they? Yeah, kiddo, did it hurt? It did hurt, Dad. Okay, well, example, we're driving home the other day, and there's a little girl that's friends of hers, and she's crying, and I said, hey, what's going on with her? Well, Dad, she got called fat by the girl that called me fat. Oh, kiddo, did you go talk to her? I did, but she was mad at the time. I said, all right, tomorrow, you take the time to go up and talk to her and share your experience, right? Tell her that it's okay and that she's beautiful, right? That's where the things that I've learned in faith of how to be kind to others and also to take that moment to see their struggle, relate with it, and then be there for them. Because shoot, when she came home, she was in tears, and I'm thinking, that's my daughter walking if she were to walk home. How can I teach this to her to, that's your friend, be supportive, be caring, show her love, But it's very tough because it seems like right now we're in a world where it's not okay to be open about our faith, open about how much we believe in trusting God. And that's something, your dad's a stubborn man. I have strong beliefs in things, and you know what? Yeah, you can wear your cross to school. Somebody tells you to tuck it in your shirt, you tell them to call your dad. That type of stuff where, and that might be my own character defects and stubbornness, but no, if she wants to wear it, she can wear it,
Sure.
You've mentioned how much I think your daughter has really helped you grow in faith and just get through the recovery process as you're being that role model for her at this time in your life. Were there some other people along the way that really stood out to you as those mentors? I know you've already touched on your family and how they just kept pushing and didn't give up on you as well, but who else did you cross paths with along the way that has helped you?
Well, when it comes to I guess the recovery world here in Bismarck, I actually do most of mine out of a rural recovery in Montana. Mm-hmm. It is a group of small towns, right? And people are out in the middle of nowhere all through Zoom. And for me, that was what I found as home. I wanted an environment where my daughter could witness, be involved with it, and understand the process that Dad's going through recovery. Here in town, there were a couple different people in the community that were very cool and very inspiring, like Bromo from over at the Walleye. All of a sudden, one morning I'm in there picking up tickets, right? And all of a sudden, next day they call me up and they're like, "Hey, you should come in and do a podcast." I'm like, "Podcast? What's that?" And he's like, "Yeah, I do a recovery podcast, and I think your story is amazing." And I'm just like, "Okay, sure, I'll come in." But then a lot of my instructors at BSC. But the thing was, it took me being willing to share my story out loud with them. Mm-hmm. But then after sharing it, because, I'm 45, 41 in that area, and I'm sitting here talking to my teachers like they're equals, and I have to remember these are my instructors,
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to see the reaction of the other students, right? They're hearing my story, and they're looking at me going, "Oh," I'm sitting there saying, "Yeah, I stayed stoned longer than you've been alive, And they're looking at me going, "Whoa, whoa." And I'm like, "Yeah." And the conversations grew. And then all of a sudden that dynamic changed. I'm getting support. I'm getting encouragement from these young men. And I'm just like, wow, you're not all lost. There are a few of you that have hope. There are a few of you that care. And that was a big part of it. I'm grateful for my sponsor. My sponsor is an amazing man, works in the recovery here in the community. Ended up going bowling with him and his child yesterday, and it's those kinds of things where I never experienced a healthy interaction with anybody for so many years, right? So being able to go out, the two of us, right, sit there one weekend, going and having some dinner at Applebee's, and we're sitting there, we're looking around, and I was like, so this is what it's like to be normal, coming to a restaurant and sitting here and talking about our lives. And he's like, yeah. I was like, huh. Never did that for 28 years of my life, and that dynamic too, outside the household in our neighborhood, because we are a multi-generational home. We have my parents, which would be Lila's grandparents, and then me and Lila downstairs. And the dynamic in the neighborhood, because all those neighbors, they saw all this going on for all those years, right? And now they've got to see the recovery. They've got to see how we're now reaching out into our neighborhood, All those same bonds that were there when all of us were little 8-year-olds and 6-year-olds running around the neighborhood are rekindling, right? And that's amazing, too, where, guess what? We all talk again now. All the neighbors are willing to say hello or come over and help or bring over a dinner or whatnot, those types of things. But it was my destruction all those years that led to us being isolated, because we were so consumed with what was going on with me.
You started coming to Inspire because of your daughter, because of Piper Pesky. What about this place, or your seeking God in more of an academic space, keeps you engaged here at Inspire?
Well, it wasn't our first stop. I can be honest with that. We tried multiple churches, because when I came back, I wanted to rekindle that faith and that growth also for myself and for her, So we tried it a couple of different churches around town, and one of them, I'm not going to lie, went in there and I was like, man, this is like Joe Ostertine, whatever his name is. It's a super church. This is humongous. This is definitely not for us. I'm more of a small church community feeling. Once Lila was coming for a couple of weeks, she came, "Dad, it's so cool. It's so cool." And I got a couple nudges from Tim and Beth, "Hey, why don't you come?" So then I decided to come for the dinner. And then found out that Randy was doing Bible study. And I was like, that's right up my alley, because that was one of the things that I found my footing in Watford with that community up there was the Bible study.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to a couple of them. I was like, man, I really like this. And on lucky days, he touches on the same stuff that Lila does, you know, so we can have that conversation. But unfortunately, with our schedule, actually going to service has been difficult for us, right? We were privileged enough to come for the Christmas one. Lila took part in that. And I said to Grandma and Grandpa, I said, you know, isn't that funny that, you know, she's 10 years old and this is the first Christmas program she's been in? Where when I was growing up, right, you started at age like 4, 5, 6,
right,
yep,
little.
and every year it was a big hoopla to be the Christmas program, you know. So that brought a sadness and also a joy to me, right? The sadness was because my life was such a disruption and unresolved things that we never had a home in a church, right? We never had. I had to get past that, right, and say, I'm grateful that now we have this place, this home, right? And it's the community. It's the, like bumping into you and your husband, sitting there talking to him about fishing, right? And at Ernie, you know. And then come to find out that Grandma knows Ernie from a long time ago, you know, the different dynamics, too, of each pastor, right? Each pastor brings a different element to the table. And you know what? Every Wednesday, hey, I like to go and chit-chat with each one of them for a moment and take what you will from each of them, because guess what? You're going to leave with some kind of inspiration that comes from each of them.
Told your story in such a fantastic, faith-filled way today, and thanks for trusting us with that.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me.
Addiction, especially in this church, is something that has impacted a lot of us, specifically Pastor Ernie and his family. And I know he's been talking for years about doing something almost like an addiction ministry and reaching out to AA and NA programs and trying to figure out ways to create a ministry at our church to assist in that, because it's so important in his life and the life of his family. So thanks for sharing your story and sharing with us. The Walleye interview, where you kind of go more in depth, where can people find that?
They have it on the website, and then was it under the archives?
So honestly, I just Googled Walleye Radio and your name, Erik Benson, and it popped right up for me. So it was easy to find. Can I ask one more question before we close? Before we leave today, if somebody is feeling stuck with addiction right now, would you have any words to pass along to them?
Oh, man. You can find peace. You can find happiness. Recovery is possible. Once you're out of that depth of addiction, it's an amazing journey. It's not going to be easy, but it is an amazing journey, becoming human again, you know?
First of all, thank you so much, like Amy said, for trusting us with your story and trusting us to share it with our audience the way that you have shared it to us. And like I said, a lot of us have been touched by addiction, whether it be ourselves or in our families, and it is awesome to see a story like yours come out of the depths of what that can be. I know a lot of people that don't come out of that and continue to struggle with it and continue to deal with it. And to see where you are, not just in your own life, but the life of your daughter and the way that you guys come into this place with bright faces every Wednesday, it brightens the place up in a way that I don't think you realize. So thank you very much for being that beacon for people.
Yeah, thank you guys for having us.
Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you so much for Erik and Lila and just what his story means to so many people who see him and learn it and know it. Thank you for the people at this church who brought him in and made him feel welcome. Thank you for your Holy Spirit that continues to move in him and inspire the people around him. We're so grateful, Father, that you are a good God, a faithful God, that even through 28 years of addiction, you can bring someone out of it from the lowest points to bring them as high as your glory. We continue to pray for that story. We pray that it continues to grow and that Lila and Erik can continue to find you in every aspect of their lives. It's in your mighty name that we pray today. Amen.
Well, everybody, thanks again for tuning in to the Dare to Care podcast this week. Thanks again to Erik and Ty for helping us out today as well. Remember, we'd love to see you here at Inspire Sundays, 9:15, 10:45 in the morning. We also have our live stream at 10:45, so you can tune in to that if you're not in the area. And you are always welcome on Wednesday evenings, 5 p.m. meals, 6 p.m. classes for all, and 7 p.m. worship. Have a great one, guys.
Perfect.
Bye.
See ya.